started the recording again. And let's see, noting that the hour is 7:02 p.m. and I'm going to initiate our meeting of the Housing Trust. I know George Morrill said he is unable to attend. The only one I anticipate Brian Blue still joining us, so maybe we'll wait another minute for that. All right, well, I'm not sure. Oh, let's see. He's hit traffic. He'll be on in 5 minutes. We can wait for Brian, or should we?
What's the agenda? I mean, we
So
have.
the point of tonight, I think after the last meeting, there was a desire to just talk about some of the kind of what are some of the financing terms that are available to.
Beth,
they're messing up my.
okay, I can't hear you. Beth, can we not talk? It's allowed.
So since I wasn't at the last meeting, maybe you could start with just a recap, something that Brian doesn't need to be here for, because was Brian at the last meeting?
Brian was at the last meeting. He attended the hybrid. So the last meeting, Bob Murchison came and presented the proposed development of the 40-unit apartment building for 108 Coolidge Street. And we didn't look in detail at the design. It turned into more of a discussion of, and we looked at a little bit at the design only in the comment that it was the location being 40 units and being 3 stories and right up near the roadway was the scale of it seemed out of place, even though down the street we've got a proposed apartment building that's approximately the same scale in height terms, but it's been designed to be on its side and be tucked away behind most of the trees to help reduce the impact from the road so that it fits in a little bit more with the surroundings.
So these concerns were raised by whom with the design?
George Morrill, I think, was raised several questions about the design and the placement.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we talked a little bit, Bob came forward and said that, he perhaps understandably was somewhat confused because I've been in part of the housing partnership that was reconstituted in 2016 in order to help write the housing production plan. And over the years, I've been part of discussions with myself, the town planner at the time, John Higley, who was the chair of the planning board, and for various other projects that Bob's come forward to town with. And so I've been part of those conversations. And in none of those was I in any position, Bob's kind of asked for in past projects, he's said, well, maybe if town could give him land, or maybe if town how could we help him make the project work? How could we support his project? And in those other meetings, there just wasn't a scenario that fit. This meeting was the first time that the Housing Trust has heard any proposed plans. And it's different in that he owns the land and he's already got his plan. And so we did clarify that this was the first time the Housing Trust has been presented with any plan or proposal. So it's not fair to say that he keeps coming to us because that wasn't accurate. So right. I just happened to be kind of that common thread just because of so many years of different committees. So right. Also it's, that's something for us, as far as we keep trying to figure out, we've been struggling with how do we as a trust support the mission of affordable housing if, I mean, yes, that's part of our mission, but that's also part of our mission is managing, is that goes hand in hand with managing funds that are in a trust. And right now our trust is zero balance. So,
Right.
Well, we do have access to money, but Heidi, we have no money, but we do have the ability to borrow
we do have the
for the
ability to borrow.
purpose of supporting affordable housing, right?
Right.
Um,
I think also though, right. So if there was something and it was a need, and that's why we have established a housing trust, if there's a need to certainly support, we have tools in our toolbox to try and find a way. But I think that part of the reason that the housing partnership finally sunsetted was the advocacy role was taken up by the planning board, which is a fitting place for the planning board to think about the town as a whole and the master plan of the town and where does affordable housing fit in. And so it wasn't necessary to have town members volunteer, another volunteer board that's doing essentially the same work. And the partnership had no funding to, and unlike the trust, the partnership had no mechanism for obtaining funding. So the partnership was sunsetted. But Marion, do you have something to add that'll clarify my rambles?
Uh, sorry, people, I'm eating my dinner, so I have my video up. Not clarify exactly, but just to follow up on what you've been saying, Eddie Mae, and what Frank has said, the trust has no money in its coffers right now. Frank, you say, well, we could borrow money, but it brings up the question of, so where would you borrow money? And Addie Mae's been ferreting out where developers can borrow money and whether they get a subsidy, and maybe that's why they call it subsidized housing, subsidy on the rate that they're able to borrow from state approved banks or agencies.
right.
But my question for you as a group, and I don't know this, it may become relevant, is if a housing trust were to try to borrow money to do affordable housing, would you have access to state subsidized, federally subsidized funds to get a favorable rate better than you could get on the open market?
I don't know. Heidi might have a better answer to that question. She knows the rates pretty well. And the sources.
Yeah, I don't think, I never thought that the housing trust could borrow on their own without going to town meeting. I mean,
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
So, because you use the town's tax ID, I don't know if it would get you any more. I mean, we've had some very good terms on borrowing that is lower than your mortgage rates and things that you'd see. But a lot of it is
Yeah.
just the market on that day of who's bidding.
Yeah.
I don't, and we can apply for grants or anything else on other programs, but it's not like there's a program for, we don't have CPA funds. We would have to do just to go to a town meeting and get a warrant to borrow money. I think right now would be one of the only mechanisms, or apply for grants if anything was available.
Right. So,
Yeah.
I mean, to follow up, I don't see that the town, under any reasonable circumstances, is going to be borrowing money to help a 40B developer right now.
Absolutely. No, you're right. We're not here. We're not going to do that. And we're not going to do that without town approval, even though we don't need it, because the chair of the Board of Selectmen can sign off, I believe, on our borrowing. Is that not right, Heidi?
Well,
need-
it has to be a town meeting vote, and then it would be the select board after the town meeting has voted it. And
It
if it's
does.
exempt debt, then they'd have to have a separate ballot vote as well,
Right.
which the town definitely wants to exempt it.
Right.
I do, I could see where if they ever wanted to do a Habitat for Humanity or some type of bill like that, that's where the housing trust could drive it. I mean, we
Right.
have some town, I've worked with Frank, I mean, we try to look if there's town-owned land, of things that can be pieced together. And that's where I would say the Affordable Housing Trust could go to the town to borrow money to do a project, but it would essentially be town controlled, not a developer controlled
Right.
project.
Exactly.
And I think
Yeah.
that's kind of where we landed at with partly another reason why the housing partnership, they wrote the housing production plan was written, a lot of education was done. And then, yes, in the housing production plan, a lot of discussion was had about, well, what kind of housing would we like to see? How would we plan for that housing? But then the reality is the town is not in the business of construction, and
Right.
we've had plenty of projects coming forward. So the reality of the town can steer somewhat, but there's no producing affordable housing right now. The town, there's enough projects coming forward doing that work for us. And
Kurt, you had asked though what we covered at that meeting that you were not able to attend, and I think there was a little more that I heard from Bob Murchison that surprised me in a way. His 40 units that he's proposing to build on his land there on Coolidge Street, the average size was about 650 square feet. Now, and there's 40 units in one building, as Eddie said, 3 stories high, on 7 acres. His water and sewer demands would probably absorb the excess that Marion has in her sewer and water district. And that's what he's hoping to get, is access to that excess water and sewer to be able to support his 40B, proposed 40B. The 40B would be deeply affordable. In other words, instead of 80%, he's talking about 60% or 40% of the average income in the community, whatever that is. And so they'd be paying rents of less than 2,000, probably averaging 1,500 a month. I asked him then, well, how could you justify building a 40 units? Because it's going to cost him, I figured, maybe $10 million just to construct the building on his land that he already owns. And he said, well, there's all kinds of grants and tax advantages and so forth that the federal government is offering that would allow him to recover his investment. So basically, he'd be putting up the money, but recovering it through grants, and then be able to own it and enjoy the rental income. And so it sounded like a pretty nice deal for him.
Well,
I'm not
I mean,
quite
the
sure it's good
rents
for the town.
well, so there's a lot there. The rents, he's not turning a significant profit on this project, the way these projects are set up.
Well, he's taking no risk, basically.
Well, I mean,
he's on the hook for he would probably be the guarantor under some conventional financing from a conventional lender.
so what he's proposing, Kurt, is he's proposing a standard low-income housing tax credit deal. And so how that works is, you're right, he's gonna be on the hook for guarantees, but it's not gonna be on the debt, because you can't have recourse debt on a low-income housing tax credit deal. He'll be on the hook for any operating deficits and any tax credit recapture if he does the wrong things and runs afoul of the IRS code. So I didn't realize those units are 650 square feet. I mean, at most they're a 1-bedroom unit.
Yes.
So, I'm trying to go on the Novogradac, which is a consultancy and CPA firm that specializes in low-income housing tax credits. And you're probably right. I'm trying to find the data, but they're probably $1,500 a month. Where he's going to make his money is in the developer fee, which is typically in most states about 15% of your total development cost. So for round numbers, let's say it costs them $10 million, tax tagging and everything, to build this thing and to get it leased up. There's a ton of other eligible costs, but for ease of use, let's just say 10 million. that means he's making $1.5 million of developer fee. And if it's structured correctly, he should be able to get all of that developer fee between the time he closes on the transaction and the time that it's placed in service and stabilized. And how it's structured is that in any good LIHTC transaction, he's going to bring a de minimis amount of equity to the table.
Right.
Usually it's just enough to be considered consideration. It's literally like $100,
Mhm.
right? And so how he gets paid then is from the generation of low-income housing tax credits. He'll do a 4% bond deal, meaning of his total eligible cost basis, again, the $10 million, he'll get 4% of that as equity each year over a 10-year period. Well, the present value of that over a 10-year period, there's a 15-year compliance period. So the biggest hurdle for Bob is not actually Bob himself in this situation. It's the fact that he has zero low-income housing tax credit experience. Massachusetts is a tough enough state to get a conventional deal done. Once you bring the state in, bringing in the federal low-income housing tax credits, I don't know a syndicator out there who is going to jump on board with working with him unless he brings someone else into JV, meaning he's going to have to give away economics vis-a-vis his developer fee. And the more just like with anything, the more economics you have to give away, the less the juice is worth the squeeze that you're going to go through.
Right.
And it's not something where you flip a switch and all of a sudden you have a 4% tax credit deal approved by the state of Massachusetts and Mass Housing. It just doesn't happen. He's easily 2.5 to 3 years out of getting this thing closed.
Well, that's what I mean. I wanted to be careful about not necessarily talking about any one particular project, but mostly because I know that some of you do have some of this finance experience with housing, to kind of educate ourselves, because this is not the first time that we've been, as a town, told we could do a project. A couple of years ago, it was proposed, the Levarsky was proposing that a waste treatment plant would be financed through LIHTC.
That's an eligible cost.
And
So,
which is, yeah, just in general, like, I'm not sure a lot of us understand what LIHTC is. So this is, I think this tonight was a good place for us to kind of get a better understanding.
So I'll give you the 2-minute crash and burn, all you need to know for the purposes of this discussion. So back before 1986, there were tax shelters. So you had doctors, lawyers, high net worth individuals investing in affordable real estate. Our former president, his family made their money doing this in Queens. And so you would build these large scale affordable housing communities, in a lot of cases with rental subsidy from the federal government, but not in all cases. And in exchange for investing in these communities and putting up the capital, you got losses. And so if I'm an attorney or a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever, making millions of dollars a year, I don't want to have to give that all to Uncle Sam. So what I can do is I can make an investment in an affordable deal, get those losses, and because it's income losses, it's the depreciation, it's the amortization, it's all that fun accounting stuff, I take that K-1 form, staple it to my tax return, and all of a sudden I have a couple $1 million worth of income that no longer exists in the eyes of the Internal Revenue Service. Back in 1986, someone said, and I should know this, said, let's formalize this with a government program. So that's when the low-income housing tax credit program was introduced as a vehicle for the public, Uncle Sam, and the Internal Revenue Service, and the private sector, doctors, lawyers, etc., to pump money into the development of affordable housing. That program originally was supposed to sunset in the early 90s. That's when it was placed into law for till the end of time, till someone changed it. There are two types of tax credits. There's a 9% credit, which means you get the present value of 9% of your total development costs over 10 years, which is a highly competitive process. You also have the 4% tax credit, which is an as of right tax credit. The thing is, you have to finance at least 50% of your total eligible development costs, which I'm not going to touch that for a second. That's like a 200 level course with tax exempt bond financing. There are many issuers out there. Mass Housing, Sherborn, if it really wanted to, could become a tax exempt bond issuer for general revenue bonds. So those are as of right. If you can get an allocation from an agency that has tax exempt bond allocation available, you can do a tax credit deal. So most first time developers out of the block will not go do a 9% deal because there's only so much 9% credits to go around. There's much more bond cap available. So that's, where most people start out. Most people also start out with, and again, just because you can check all the boxes doesn't mean you're going to find an issuer who wants to issue bonds, because their reputation is at risk. There's headline risk. Also, just because you can check all the boxes doesn't mean that there's a tax credit syndicator out there who wants to become your partner for the next 15 years. And I have seen a lot of very good, and we'll use good as a relative term, market rate developers get completely slaughtered in the tax credit industry because they did not know what they were doing. They ran afoul of the IRS. They got removed as the general partner because they upset their tax credit syndicator partner. And that tax credit syndicator partner is going out and saying, okay, I'm creating these various equity funds, and I need to sell them to people who need tax credit losses. Banks, insurance companies, Verizon back in the day used to be a huge buyer. Sherwin-Williams used to be a huge buyer. Again, anybody who has a corporate tax liability that they want to get rid of and make an economic return. Now, I, as a tax credit syndicator in my past life, can't go to Bank of America and say, hey, I've got this great deal for you in Sherborn. It's XYZ developer who has never done a development deal with tax credits affordable in their lifetime. And they're going to say, stop talking. We don't want this deal. So that's why, even if you have a good consultant, that consultant needs to have skin in the game. They can't just be a fee consultant. They have to own part of the transaction. A lot of good developers who are starting out will partner with a local housing authority, whatever, who doesn't necessarily have that development experience in-house. So they're saying, okay, you haven't committed a felony, you have a decent resume, let's develop a deal together. And then once that person builds that reputation using essentially someone else's balance sheet, then they can start to do deals on their own. But again, just because, to put it rather bluntly, I'm 5'6", 5'7" on a good day. I would love to wake up tomorrow and be 6 feet tall. That's not happening either. So just because you say I want to be a tax credit developer doesn't mean you're going to be one. I mean, I've been in the industry, for the tax credit specific industry, for over 15 years, and I can't go out and develop a deal on my own right now because I have no track record. So again, throwing around ideas like, oh, I'm just going to go to LIHTCs and grants, and it doesn't just
Much more difficult,
happen
right?
that way. There's,
Is this scenario different for infrastructure? Like the idea that a LIHTC would be used for town center sewer. It needed to have Sherborn as a partner for that, right? Or
So,
private.
for instance, you have on-site costs, you have off-site costs, right? So if part of his, let's not even say his, let's say Brian Blue developer wants to develop something on Coolidge. I have sewer connection costs. That sewer connection cost, in addition to the infrastructure that I'm building on site, running the utility lines, is part of my cost basis. So I can do it if I can figure out a way to make the numbers dance and pay for that offsite infrastructure to get it to my site, then by all means, I don't have to
Scenario
partner.
I was thinking of was the one that was being presented for downtown about 5 years ago, maybe, or 4 years ago. I guess it was
Like Barsky's.
pre-COVID.
Yeah.
5 years ago with doing, basically a glorified septic. It's a
No, and look,
waste treatment
it's
plant.
all about,
It's in fields and all of that.
it's just like any other real estate transaction. Your sources of funds and your uses of funds have to balance. So if it costs $100 million to bring sewer into the town center, and my development shares 20 million of that, just as long as my capital stack can absorb that $20 million, by all means.
Well, this is basically what he was planning to do. I'm not quite sure from your interaction with him, Brian, that he fully understood, because he was asking some questions about who you're working with and so forth. So it sounded as though he may have read about this, but wasn't really clear on some of the details of how you
There are, I mean, again, I've been doing, I see Marion has her hand up, so I will defer yield the floor to her in just one second, but I've been doing this a very, very long time. Again, it's not something, you can go on Wikipedia right now and look up what is a low-income housing tax credit. I've been doing this for 15 years. There are things about the tax credit program I don't have the facility with that a developer needs, because it's just so nuanced. The section 42 and section 142 of the IRS tax code is hundreds of pages filled with contradictions, and all you have to do is mess up one of those contradictions and the IRS comes down on you like a hammer, and it's not good.
Marion has her hand up.
Yeah, Brian, thank you so much for this. I had no idea what he was talking about with the low income tax credit. And this makes me more and more certain that he's not going to be able to go that route. But there's also,
if he can, more power to him, but
yeah, sure.
I don't see it.
He's also got a significant timing problem. I have no idea how long it would take for him to organize all this and to get a partner and get a low-income tax credit. But meanwhile, he can't do this at all unless we have water and sewer there. And we know what that timeline looks like. If all goes well, and we just got a House legislative number for our bill. It's in the legislature, but we're told by our representatives it's gonna take months. If we're lucky, we'll have a legal water sewer district maybe next fall. I would say that's probably the earliest. So it's a good year, but it sounds like, and as soon as that's in place, all the other things that we need to have in place should be in place. The intermunicipal agreement with Framingham, the MWRA approvals, etc. So say it happens next fall. That's our optimistic view. It sounds like, and that is when they will start putting in the water and sewer lines, paid for. We don't have to worry about that now. Paid for, certainly not by Bob Murchison, but by Toll Brothers grants, whatever. So it sounds like for him to,
and we'll have our building permit then too, won't we?
Yes,
So
that's
we
right.
will then be at 10%.
Will be at 10%, but it's too, that train's already left the station anyway, because he's got his Pell letter from the state. That won't stop his project. But I'm not sure how far he can get, even if he could do run through all the hoops that a low-income tax credit would take. He won't have any assurance that he's going to have water and sewer for almost another year.
Right.
So that puts his whole timescale quite a ways into the future. And then that opens the way for other people to apply for that excess capacity who have, maybe a project ready to go. So I don't know, the timing is tricky. If I understood you correctly, Brian, to put this sort of a low-income tax credit in place would take quite a long time, even if you had your project approved by a comprehensive permit by the town and the state and all that other stuff in place. He can't.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I don't see how he sees that the timing is feasible here. But
I mean, the only thing he could do, and I just, want to be cognizant of other people's desire to have their hand raised. The only thing he could do is roll the dice and start to make his applications and assume that he's going to get that capacity and say to whatever issuer, look, I'm going to get it. If we don't get it, I don't close the deal. You don't give me your tax credit money, and everybody walks away. I mean, that's usually how this goes. So you dual track, and a developer will say, okay, I have a certain amount of sunk costs. I know I'm gonna have to spend money to get this done. So why don't I do everything and have the last thing be, okay, yes, you have your water and sewer. Boom,
Right.
done. We're off to the races.
I
I do
wasn't-
what I'm going to add.
Heidi?
Heidi.
Oh, great, thanks. So I had a question. I thought Bob said he was speaking with community builders as a partner in this, which I think they have done quite a couple
Community builders,
projects.
yeah, community builders is very prolific.
Right,
Now,
and
again, you'll probably agree that speaking to and becoming joint venture partners are two different sides that, speaking to partners,
right,
there's a long time that a lot of things have to happen.
right, but they are known in this field, so if he does partner with them, that
Like
increases.
if he partners with community builders,
Yeah.
1000%. You don't get much better than the community builders in the state of Massachusetts.
That's what I was thinking. Okay. Thank you.
So, I mean, I guess, again, our discussion was not to weigh in on or to talk about any supporting of any project, because our agenda was purely for kind of educating and talking about financing. Also partly because, if the housing trust, eventually ever does have funds that we need to manage, and we do down the road need to figure out how we utilize any tools if we need to support creation of more affordable housing than what we already have, then I guess I wanted to make sure we understood what options there were out there. And again, like I said, we kind of, especially our members at large, were selected for their experience in the industry. So I don't know, I guess the question so the LIHTC project or LIHTC financing options it's only for rental projects. And so I guess the question is, are you aware of any other subsidies that are available for home ownership projects, other types of affordable housing construction?
I mean, there's always a lot of different financing structures. LIHTC is purely rental. The only time I've ever seen any type of home ownership is when you do a single family or duplex style, and there's a tenant right to purchase at the year end of year 15. But those aren't going rental anytime soon. I mean, going home ownership anytime soon. And obviously there are various financing programs out there. And so that really, and again, I don't have a lot of experience with single family home
Right.
ownership for sale, but my understanding is most of that resides with the buyer of the unit, not the developer of the unit. The developer of the unit can point eligible households to say, yeah, you want to buy from me? Okay, go speak to Mary Jones over at, you know, Federal Home Loan Bank or something like that. They have various programs and, you know, subsidy, or for instance, Habitat for Humanity, you know, that you build a Habitat for Humanity deal, and the people who are the eligible homeowners get Habitat for Humanity basically is their mortgage company, right? They self-finance.
Okay.
There are some programs for home ownership, affordable home ownership. The governor just introduced a huge affordable housing bond bill, which has funds set aside in it to support one of the programs. I'm trying to find what it is. But I'm not very experienced, and I haven't worked on any affordable home ownership deals myself. But there are some programs in the Commonwealth that do support that. They're just
Alright.
not nearly as utilized as like LIHTC or other programs.
I think it's good that
Yeah.
we're learning about this, but I don't see, Eddie, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I don't see the need for the trust here, the Affordable Housing Trust, to raise any money in the next 3 or 4 years. And then we will have this Coolidge project completed. We will have achieved our 10%. And then there may be interest in the part of the town to sock away some of the surplus revenues we'd be getting from the project on Coolidge Street, the tax revenues coming in from those Meadowbrook Commons and the Coolidge crossing. But then we have the ability also to borrow. So in terms of funding, I don't think our trust is going to be raising any money or receiving any money.
Frank, I completely agree. I don't see that as our role, but I guess as our role of understanding what
Yes.
these things are and what these terms that are being presented to us are. I think that's important that
Yes.
we understand what, again, most of us are not in the development world. And so, but we are tasked with understanding affordable housing and how it's produced. So for me, it was important for me to understand what some of these tools were. And I figured this was a nice way for us to do some of this educating and take advantage of the
For
resources.
instance, there's a house on South Main Street that's been vacant for 20, 25 years.
Bingo.
And you could buy that with money borrowed from the trust here. Develop
Exactly.
it into affordable and maybe resell it to qualified affordable buyer and improve the appearance of that building. Okay.
Frank, it's literally 3 doors down from me. I pass it every day.
Oh, okay. And it must bother you to see that.
Marion, you've been waiting patiently.
Oh, no problem. I really appreciate you putting this together, Addie Mae. It's good just to get educated. And thanks to Brian in particular that has done a lot of educating tonight.
I did a presentation. I'm trying to find it on my computer and I'll circulate it. And it's
That'd
just
be great.
it's like a 101 crash course.
Oh, that would be wonderful. I have one more little question for you, Brian, regarding low-income tax credit or very, very affordable housing projects. This is the second one that we've had proposed in town now by the same developer, of course. But my question all along has been, once it's built, say he can do all the low-income tax credit, gets it built. Once it's built, what happens 10, 20 years down the road when the taxes on the property and the rents on the property have to remain low? How is the property maintained? How do you avoid the basically gradual degradation
Default.
of a good property?
Sure. And that's one thing I've always said, 15 years is a long time to be miserable. And so that's why, especially on when I was, the chief credit officer of my, 2 companies ago, whenever there was a deal that was coming back in for a re-syndication, meaning it was already been built, most of the time you have a 15-year tax credit compliance period, but you have a 30-year low income housing affordability LORA attached to it. In California, it's 55, because what it is, it's almost like the mafia. Once you get in, they don't want to let you out. They want to always keep it affordable. So what happens is you set aside, even on a new building, you do what's called a reserve for replacement analysis. So you get a professional engineer to say, okay, over the next 15 years, this is what this property is going to need. It's going to need new dishwashers, new roofs, new HVAC, all this stuff. And every month, either the first mortgage lender or the tax credit syndicator will collect a deposit to that reserve for replacement, which is placed in an interest-bearing account. And between what you underwrite as your annual maintenance costs, plus your replacement reserve, the rainy day fund, will get you to that 15 years. And then they build in some cushion, they escalate by 3%. And you always want to make sure that over that 15 years, you're depositing, but you're also pulling out. You want to make sure that it never goes negative. So at the end of the 15 years, a developer will say, okay, well, I have this, now I have another 15 years of affordability. What am I going to do? I'm going to re-syndicate it. I'm going to take this 15-year-old property. I'm going to tear it apart, because I only make money and get eligible basis is if I put work into it. So now I'm going to take, and that's why there are affordable housing new construction deals that are built better than market rate deals. Granite countertops, all hardwood cabinets, because they only, with a conventional deal, you can go out and refinance it every time rates go down. You pull cash out, you do work to the property. You don't have that with tax credits. You have 15 years. And so that's why it's important to get it right. So there's always that sinking fund. And then at the end of the 15 years, the developer says, okay, I'm going to buy out my tax credit limited partner. I'm going to buy them out for a nominal amount, and I'm going to do this deal again, and I'm going to make another 15% developer fee. So that's how these developers make money. It's not so much through the cash flow, unless it's a subsidized deal, meaning government rental subsidy, like a Section 8 half contract. They make their money by churning deals. So they go through their portfolio, and once they get to the end of it, they start all over again and just keep on doing that. And that's how you, quote unquote, feed the monster.
That's assuming the developer is still around.
Yes. Now, interestingly enough, the commercial mortgage default rate, even including 2008, is like 3-4% tops. Since the low income housing tax credit was made permanent in the early 90s, what do you think the default rate has been amongst tax credit deals? Cumulatively, like over the term, average default rate.
1 or 2%.
What's that?
1 or 2%.
Even better, 12 basis points, 0.12%.
0.12.
Because it's so heavily regulated,
Yeah.
and so heavily structured. And the thing is, let's say I completely blow up a deal in Sherborn. I can't go to Quincy and do a deal, because Mass Housing will say no. And then let's say I decide to go to Florida, where nobody knows me. Your tax credit syndicator is going to ask you, have you ever tossed keys on a deal? And if you say yes, game over.
Because it was a federal program, not.
Exactly. You will never get another bond allocation. You will never get a 9% allocation. Just that's why, the people who were bad actors were out of the industry very, very quickly.
Good to know there are so many controls.
Oh, it's the one time that I enjoy government oversight. Very few times. That's one of them.
Thank
So
you.
I guess kind of on that note, we were also digging in. I mean, I think, the planning board and the housing partnership, the past housing partnership was involved in when as introducing the concept of inclusionary zoning as a tool in the toolbox when we were writing the housing production plan. It was proposed that the town should adopt inclusionary zoning. And in 2018, 2019, when we were working on the bylaw, we selected 15% as the target for if a developer came to town with a subdivision proposal, that they should have 15% be affordable homes, because we wanted something more than just the something to help us get ahead towards that 10% goal. Only having it be 10% affordable homes would not help us jump ahead, was the thinking at the time. A couple people said that that was going to make it economically difficult for a developer and would push them towards a 40B. But at the time, looking at, again, 2018, 2019, looking at what was going on in town and trying to think of, we were working on the master plan and the direction of affordable housing in town, and trying to have kind of slow and steady was the goal. Other than kind of one project, but any additional affordable housing would be slow and steady. That was also post the 2017 approval of the Coolidge Street 84 and the Coolidge Crossing and the EA zoned parcel. So but now sorry, flash forward, we're reevaluating the inclusionary zoning, and what's come up is, well, I think at the time we were thinking, well, how can a developer do 25%, and what's the difference? And the difference is our kind of coming, what our feeling was from what we kind of have looked at the language, is that the difference is that under all of our local bylaws and under a local process for development, they're a developer not doing necessarily a utilizing 40B wouldn't have the same subsidies, and subsidies we're thinking are the financing available, so the loans for construction loans that are available under 40B. And we've been trying to kind of get that nailed down, because of course at the last meeting and also at a most recent planning board meeting, Bob has insisted that 40B developers do not get any subsidies from the state. So that was something that was still not 100% sure. I know Heidi had done some looking. Heidi, can you share what you found?
I was mainly seeing the rental units seem to be able to get subsidies if you do have a rental project. It's the home ownerships. It's not subsidies. There are benefits in the sense that it's what you could call the density bonus, the fact that they're allowed to put more market rate units in a smaller landmass. So if a parcel normally would have had maybe 2 homes by making it a 40B, and now they're getting 4 homes in it, one would be affordable, but he gets that third market rate one, which would help give him the benefit of and bring in profits from that to offset the fourth affordable one, versus if he had just done a conventional application and being able to only use 2 market rate homes in that existing spot without a 40B application. I'm thinking that that's where it's not a subsidy in the word of actual getting cash, but there's still a financial benefit to doing a 40B project. And it's probably that density bonus is where I'm thinking they get the benefit for money.
Well, we're still trying, put a question forth to Mass Housing because on their website, they say part of 40B is subsidized financing. So I'm looking to get some further clarification on what subsidized financing means, again, for our own education. Not that we are going out and borrowing or building or anything, but just since that, you know, at some point, potentially we'd be asked to weigh in on something, and given that we're the trust is supposed to have some understanding of the finances surrounding affordable housing, I just wanted to kind of put that out there to all of you, and as soon as I get some clarification from Mass Housing, I will share that information, and that's what that is.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I don't think there's any subsidy directly connected to Chapter 40B. I just think it works out that most projects done under Chapter 40B also include some subsidized funding as part of their financing, as part of the debt stack. It's not, I think, again, I don't know what Bob, what was said, but
Well,
I would think most 40B projects involve some sort of subsidized financing as part of the project.
well, they also get a subsidy in that they're limited to a 20% profit on costs. I understand. Is that right? And so that profit margin on costs is a subsidy in a way for the developer.
No. So it's kind of, and I apologize, I'm eating some soup, so you guys don't have to watch that. But what that is that it's because a developer fee in a lot of cases is also basis eligible. What it does is prevent the artificial inflation of eligible basis for the purpose of tax credits. And so that's not really a subsidy. It's just to make sure that no one's out there taking an undue share of available resources and putting it in their pocket. So Pennsylvania is 15%. I don't know what Massachusetts is, but if you do a LIHTC deal in Pennsylvania under the bond documents, it's 15%.
Well, we're thinking of a traditional 40B that, we're working with here in Sherborn. I
Well,
thought
no,
20%
but to the same point, I mean, 20%, that's just saying if I have a $10 million deal, I can only have $2 million worth of developer fee. I can't have $10 million worth of,
Right.
$10 million deal, can't have $10 million, another 10 million of developer fee. Like, for instance, somebody buys a piece of land for $1 million, puts up a $2 million building, and then sells it for $6 million in Dover. It's, it's to prevent that kind of stuff.
So that's the opposite of a subsidy, really. It's a limitation on the developer.
Yes, exactly.
So I guess, kind of to that end, I mean, the idea, I think the density bonus that a 40B offers, I know when we were working on the wording, the language for the inclusionary zoning at the time, the town planner, Gino Carlucci, was recommending adding language for a density bonus to entice use of inclusionary zoning over the 40B so that there would be more projects done under local zoning. The problem is we just couldn't envision how to include a density bonus, and maybe there's a way, but at the time we couldn't envision how you include a density bonus when you've got the infrastructure limitations and the zoning without changing the zoning. I mean, without changing Board of Health regulations and changing conservation regulations, and not so much conservation, because conservation for the most part I believe is adhering to state wetlands, but
As I recall, our debate at the time, Addie Mae, was, do we do 10% affordable units or 15%? And we went back and forth, worrying that 10% would kind of keep us, even, but meanwhile, other market rate houses are being built and we have to get a little bit ahead of even. So we did 15%,
But so now that 15% so we haven't seen any projects under the bylaw, does it bear discussing whether we should amend the inclusionary zoning bylaw to reduce the percentage to 10%?
I think it does, and at the planning board level, I believe we will be discussing that to revisit for Springtown meeting, because of the situation, because of kind of our experience now having it be a couple years in, and no takers, if you will. And also because of the discussion around the 3A zoning, the multifamily housing zoning requirement near transit hubs that the state's requiring. They originally weren't going to have any affordable housing component in that bylaw, the state legislation, and a number of towns said, wait, but you're making us you're making us add 10% affordable housing, and now you're putting in place something that's going to increase the number of housing units in a town and make it even harder to ever reach 10%. And so the state conceded, okay, we'll add 10%, but no more than 10% in the 3A zoning for multifamily. So I guess to kind of get in line with that, it would also make sense to look at revisit inclusionary zoning to be 10%.
Well, we won't be facing this, will we, if we have achieved our 10%?
Well, eventually censuses are going to, I mean, there's always going to be new construction. We don't know exactly what the future will be bringing. We're not going to be facing it in the next, well, potentially. I mean, nothing's been built yet. We're still in a lot of limbo land, but
Well, yeah, it's also just good policy that we might want for the town. I mean, as the Affordable Housing Trust, I think our mission is not simply to try to get to the 10% and then we're done,
No.
you know. So I personally, I would support that, and I would think I would think it could be something that the Affordable Housing Trust would support if it comes up before the town again.
How would Toll Brothers react to that if we changed it?
Change it to 10%.
Yeah.
They would be perfectly happy if we changed it to 10%.
Oh, would they benefit from that?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
And that's one of the, I think it should be brought to town meeting. But one of the downsides is that people will think we're doing it just because Toll Brothers has this multi-unit housing development. But in fact, there are other multi-unit developments that can happen outside of 3A and
Yeah.
B.
Okay.
We can have subdivisions, for example. And those should also include some affordable units.
Yeah. Okay.
10% would be reasonable.
Yeah.
so I don't really have anything further to discuss tonight. I didn't have the minutes on the agenda, so we will have to probably in January have a short meeting, and then I'm assuming it'll be short unless something major comes up, but probably it'll be a short meeting to just discuss what might be on the town warrant in January as well. And at that time we can approve minutes from November, and also I'll have the minutes from tonight's meeting at that time that we can approve. And I guess the other thing is I guess rereading the housing trust bylaw, that there is under kind of after it talks about the what the board or what the trustees consists of and how they're selected or appointed. There is it says that there shall be an elected chair. So I guess in January we can elect a chair. I mean, we're such a small group. I guess I forgot that language was in there. So, but just
Is that your campaign speech?
Yeah, I was going to say, get ready.
Anyway, but like I said, it's wasn't in my agenda for tonight, so we'll revisit in January.
You have a report for the town report, don't you? Don't we have to prepare a report to the town?
Yeah, the town annual report and kind of what we've done. And I think the best way to handle that, I mean, usually Jeannie wants that by February, early
Right.
February. So we can also, I'll have a draft. It won't be, I don't anticipate it being very long.
No, right.
But yeah, that time we can also approve the language. I'll get
Minutes. Yep. Okay.
so kind of, I guess, housekeeping stuff in January.
All
So
right.
unless anyone else has anything, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay. Well,
Have a
thank
good
you.
holiday, everyone.
Yes, thank you,
You as
everyone.
well. Thank you.